Welcome to a very special edition of Grace Under Pressure, where my special guest today is Scott Osman, CEO of 100 Coaches. Those of you who know the program know that Grace Under Pressure deals with soft stuff, the stuff that we forget, like caring and compassion and commitment. But grace, for me, is the generosity we show, respect we demonstrate for one another, and the compassion we demonstrate. And when you're a leader, as people like Scott are, in tough times, you act for the benefit of all and energize everyone around you. So welcome, Scott. I appreciate you being on here today.
So great to be here, John. Thanks.
Great. I want to tell folks a little bit about you. Scott Osman is a thought leader in the area of purpose strategy. So what does that mean? He's rare in his combination of multidisciplinary talents and has a broad spectrum from creative to management, which is unique. And we'll talk about that. Scott has a passion for developing talent and applying that talent and best practices for the good of the organization. Scott specializes in strategic services as well as creative. He helps people and businesses reposition themselves, so how they grow, transform, and evolve, and that's individually and corporately. And Scott served previously as a key innovator and global director at Purpose Strategy Practice for the Landor Associates. Excuse me. Mm-hmm. Now, Scott's newest venture, at least new just to me, is as CEO of 100 Coaches. And that began about 4 years ago with our colleague, Marshall Goldsmith. And it was a group of coaches, and it's since become the world's premier organization for leaders, leadership thinking, and leadership coaches. And this year, Scott launched a new online leadership academy, Methods of 100 Coaches and 100 Leaders Live, a virtual leadership conference. Welcome, Scott. It's an honor to have you on the show today.
Thank you, John. Great to be here.
Great. Scott, you have a unique position because you're the CEO of 100 Coaches, which means you with coaches as well as thought leaders, as well as corporate people. So what are the different perspectives you're hearing in our crazy upside down world right now?
Well, John, 100 Coaches is a very particular organization in that all of the people, as you mentioned, leaders, leadership thinkers, and leadership coaches are really focused on how to improve the lives of others and how to take great people and make them better. And I think that actually is a great way to view our time right now, where subduing the ego, putting other people first, setting a vision and elevating people to follow and execute on that vision are, I think, going to be the real watchwords of leadership in the near term and hopefully into the future. It's certainly how all the people within 100 Coaches approach the world.
Yes, there's a real spirit of other directedness. What can we do to make the world a better place? And from your perspective, because you manage all of us, hold us together, it's like herding squirrels, I think. Is it resonating? Are we having an impact?
Yeah, absolutely. Marshall Goldsmith, who created the organization, is a big fan of selecting the right client to get the right outcome. And I think at 100 Coaches, we've selected the right people to get the right outcome. People who all agree that putting your ego second is an important way to elevate others. Having said that, I think it's also important, especially during times of COVID, times of stress, to recognize that we all need things for ourselves as well. Putting your ego ahead of everybody else doesn't mean that you don't still have needs, that you don't still have an ego, that you also don't need to be happy and successful. So we're trying to find that balance right now. It's good, hard work.
Yeah. And I think that, and now that you're helping us get our message out in new and different ways, and one of them is virtually. So tell me a little bit about the 100 Leaders Live. What's going on? So.
Yeah, 100 Leaders Live is a new initiative that we just launched. We did it in partnership with WBEX, one of the world's leaders in virtual conferencing, and our good friend there, Ben Croft. And 100 Leaders Live is it's going to be it's a year-long production of bringing the talent, mostly of 100 coaches, making it available to the world so that anybody can learn how to be a better leader. And, leadership is a universal skill. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, we just completed the first 15 talks. I think those are available. Go to 100leaders.live, 100leaders.live. And we're going to be doing 2 more every month.
Great. It's exciting. I want to back up just a little bit to give people a perspective on you and where you came. So what I found fascinating is you began your career as a fashion photographer. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure how this got into my head, but when I graduated college, I decided the thing I really wanted to do in life was to become a photographer. And quite frankly, at first, I didn't know which kind of photographer I wanted to be. I went to New York and I worked for really the greatest photographers in the world. And the last photographer I worked for was a Vogue contract photographer. And that seriously is one of the better jobs in the world. We flew all over the world with an amazing entourage. And after that experience, working with him, we did fashion and portrait. I went to Paris. I lived in Paris for 5 years and shot, fashion photography and portraiture. But I realized in looking back at that, that the skills I was developing and using there were skills that I continue to use in different form throughout my life. Photography for me, fashion or portraiture, was really about seeing and understanding the other person and translating what I saw into something that I could reflect back and share to them. That's a coaching skill. That's a leadership skill, and really enabling, through the device of photography at that point, showing people sort of their best self.
You said something very prescient, and I thought it just captured it as far as portrait photography is showing people as they don't see themselves. Is that correct? Did I get that?
Yeah, absolutely. People don't really see themselves. There's a lot of baggage that we bring to our own self-image. And through photography, but also through coaching and through leadership, quite frankly, we have the ability to show people the potential that they wouldn't otherwise have seen in themselves, and communicate and allow them to create space to improve and be better, and to attain their greatness.
I know that. And then so from portraiture photography, you evolved into business career. I mean, some people might say devolve if you left Paris back to New York, but that's a judgment call.
Well, a whole new life. I started a new life.
A new life.
In business.
So you went from the creative to business. So what was that transition like?
So it was still very creative career. I went into the world of branding, which applied the same skills in a different way. So instead of now seeing people in their best light, my job was to see companies and present companies in their best light, and to understand what the true self of a company was and how to communicate it and project it. And I did that work first in my own company for many years. Great company still around called Double Space. And then I worked at Landor Associates. And my intention of going to Landor Associates was to sort of take the idea of branding and sort of seeing the best self of a company to the next level. Landor is one of the top 5 branding companies in the world. And at Landor, I got to work with Fortune 500 companies, and created something there called purpose branding, which was the alignment of business brand and social responsibility. This was, I guess, around 2008, started doing this work. And really helping move companies towards, I think what now the Business Roundtable might call social responsibility, but really a recognition that when companies are doing their best to help the world, they're actually doing the best to help themselves. And the research, quite frankly, always bears that out.
And there's no better time for that than right now. I mean, we're in a pandemic, of course, where we have a couple of viruses. We have obviously COVID, we have economic fragility, and then we have the virus of racism that we're
Mhm.
addressing through, we hope, social injustice. And so this purpose is a lodestone for us. Tell us about that. So.
Right. So purpose really is about going back to the origins, very often going back to the origins of the company. Many companies, I would even say most companies, were founded with a purpose. In the case of Procter & Gamble, a company I worked with for a long time, their purpose was to bring originally candles and soap in a trusted way to a mass market. That's why they started in Cincinnati. And for the life of the company, certainly when I was working with the company, which was not that long ago, all of the products that they made, virtually all the products they made people's lives a little bit better. And in purpose strategy, what we hope to do is reconnect companies to their purpose and understand that when you communicate it to your employees, your stakeholders, your customers, they actually respect the company more and see the value in the company. And we forget sometimes that, toothpaste is not, we take it for granted now. But there was a time when, tooth decay was a real scourge. And because of Crest toothpaste and others like it, it's really, in most parts of certainly the United States and many parts of the world, it's no longer a problem.
Yeah, no, it's true. We kind of skimmed over it, but I want to highlight the work of 100 coaches. So tell us how it actually began. So.
Yeah, that's a great story. So,
Okay, 1 hour.
yeah, so 100 coaches began. So Marshall, I was doing some other work with Marshall at the time. Marshall went and he took a class, a workshop really, with Aisha Bursell, who had written a book called Design the Life You Love.
Yep.
And Marshall took this workshop. In the course of the workshop, it really helps you uncover what really drives sort of the life that you really want to have. And Marshall realized in taking that course that, like his mentor Peter Drucker, he really wanted to give away more of his knowledge than he was doing already. He's speaking all over the world, but he decided he was going to train 15 coaches in everything he knew. And so he put a little video up on LinkedIn, and at that time, I think 12,000 people applied. It's now almost 20. But 12,000 people saw the video and started to apply, and he realized it was a little bit bigger than that. He called me up because, as I said, we were working on something else together. He said, let's see what becomes of this. And so we picked 25 people in the initial group. This is about 4 years ago. And what we found is people did want the information. The information was good. But it turns out people also wanted community. That a lot of the thought leaders and coaches and even leaders, they were in their own way alone in the world, in the way that leadership is a very lonely field. And here was a community that we were starting to form, where people who shared common values and common goals and complementary skills could get together. So we invited another 25 and then another 25, and over the course of the last 4 years, we now have over 250 members in the group. And they are an eclectic group. They're a very eclectic group. They're an eclectic group of leadership coaches, leadership thinkers, and actual leaders in organizations. And I think that cross-pollination also is really fascinating because you have thinkers, doers, and coaches all working together.
And it's one of the honors of my life is to be invited to be part of this group. And you hit what excites me is access to so many of us, but is community, because so many of us, certainly from the coaching world, we're often solo entrepreneurs or working in very small organizations. So the ability to connect with others is enriching. And so that's what brings me to it and why I am so committed to it. So
Yeah. And now Marshall, who always has a brilliant idea, and then we test them. The latest idea he's really focused on is this idea of knowledge philanthropy. And so one of the mandates to the community is, how do we make sure that more people get access to the information that we have? And that was really the impetus behind the methods leadership courses, methodsof.com, where we're actually taking many of the people within the 100 Coaches community have developed courses that are available on that platform. It's a great platform. And the 100 Leaders Live, which is a place where the 100 coaches can present their material to the world as well.
Right. And that's, I mean, the nature of coaching is one goes into it, or one from a leadership standpoint too, is because you have something you want to share and you want to help. And what is the principle? Helping leaders become better. And so by broadening it past our community, or giving a community or the outreach, we share our ideas, which is really the whole purpose of this. Mm-hmm. And in a way, hopefully add light and enlightenment to the practice of the art and practice of leadership. So.
Yeah, very true.
Now, I want to drill down on you, Scott, a little bit, because you are adept at branding. And one of your attributes, tell us how you approach it. You have a 3-step process that I like. So
I have a 3-step process to branding.
Yeah. Well, you talk about listening. Listening.
Oh, yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah. So listen, the core of I guess you're right. Core of my approach to branding is first to listen. Recall back when I was talking about photography. In photography, it's watching, it's looking, it's seeing, and that's true here too. Is I'm not really that interested in my branding work, or quite frankly, my coaching work, or any other work that I do, in making things up and imposing them on people. So the first thing that's critical for me is to listen and really understand what I think the truth is of what's going on. And often there are many things that we're listening to. So the next step is synthesizing, is being able to understand what's important, what's not important, what's truth, which things have to combine together. And then the last aspect of branding that's so critical, of course, is articulating it.
And I think that's, because I've heard you speak on this before, it's a full circle for you. And because if you go back to your photographic background, where you enable people to see themselves as others don't, it's exactly what you're doing with branding in communicating with us. I have seen your work in real time. I'm saying, have you considered this? And it leads to rich and robust conversations and some degree of insight. You have a comment? So.
Yeah, no, you're right, John. I feel really lucky that it's a skill I've been doing all my life. I've just done it in different ways, and I think finally now in this 100 Coaches environment, it really gives me a broad canvas to paint on, to listen, synthesize, and articulate over and over again in different environments. Sometimes it's with people, with the brand themselves. Sometimes it's their content. Again, sort of listening to the content and seeing what the real gems are, synthesizing those out, combining with other things, and then articulating them back is a real, it comes very easy to me, which I really enjoy doing it.
Right. Well, I know you've helped me, and I know that you've helped others. And part of that is we talked about 100 Coaches Live, and we talked about methods. Which, by the way, if anything, from the training perspective, it is the best photographed training work I've seen ever. So it's quite astounding. There's another aspect of 100 Coaches, and that is those of us in the community can offer our services to others, and you help make that happen. Tell us about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when I think about the 100 Coaches ecosystem, the first and core part of it is the community itself. Creating a community of people who can rely on each other and trust each other, and look to each other for guidance, advice, and just community. But then we're also looking at, like, how do we make it possible for more people to derive benefit from this amazing resources that we have? So as we mentioned, we've already talked about the 100 Leaders Live, which is a sort of a broadcast community. We've talked about Methods of by 100 Coaches, which is our online courses. And then we're also now putting together a new opportunity to make the resources of 100 Coaches available to more people. So that if you're looking for a coach or consultant, a workshop, whatever it is, at the highest level with the best talent, we become a one-stop shop for the best talent in coaching, consulting, and workshops.
And that's your extension, because in addition to the branding that you do, it's the productizing. So it's one thing to have a brand, people know about it, but what is that brand and how do I get it out there? So, and that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, we're trying to make it as simple as possible for people to find the resources that they're looking for. Yeah. It's not always, it's not that easy. It's a very complicated world. And in some ways a very bespoke world. And I guess the other work that we're doing is sort of a curatorial work, where people come to us, they know what their problem is, they know they need a resource, and we can help connect them to the right resource.
And that's where you're listening, synthesizing, and articulating, and comes right in. And I think that's especially, it's interesting, Scott, as I watched our world and our pandemic now, it's far less travel, of course, but it's also, for me, I know it has opened the world to coaching, in the sense that think nothing of coaching someone in Europe and I don't have to get on an airplane or wherever it is. And I think that's not just me, but all of us. And, I think we have the ability to share our ideas, but, and others, it's a two-way street. So we only broaden that knowledge and get it out there in new and different ways. So.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say, I empathize with so many people that have been disrupted by the pandemic. And certainly there's a lot of things that we relied on that we're not going to go back to, or that'll be very different. But of course, like a lot of things, when there's disruption, there's also a lot of winners. And I'm really encouraged by service providers that can adapt to the virtual world and can figure out how to digitize their services in a way that allows them to deliver it more efficiently and more effectively. I'll give you sort of a trivial example, but not trivial for me. I'm fortunate enough to be able to work out with a trainer. I just realized after years of not doing exercise on my own that I needed a trainer to be in the kind of condition that I want to be, which is not it's not exceptional condition, but it's healthy. And I live in New York City, so going to the gym was not a hardship. But my trainer, like all of us, can no longer go to gyms. He went back to where he lived in upstate New York, and we do the training virtually. And I have to say, I like the virtual training every bit, if not more, than I like the in-person training. With a little bit of equipment set up in my home, using an old camera and an old iPad, I can have an amazing experience. And it's more efficient for him. It's more efficient for me. And there's a lot of examples of occupations that were not digitized that now can be, because we've all become accustomed to this new virtual world.
Right, and and part of it's accessibility, and talking to more and more people who are getting their message out, and certainly when coaching. And my daughter is a social worker and works in mental health, and she does it through telehealth, and physicians and things like that too. So we all change it, and speaking more broadly, pulling back a bit from your perspective, as because you're in the nexus of so many thought leaders, what opportunities are arising that you think of that we should keep our eye on? Do you have a perspective on that, Scott?
Wow. I mean, that's such a big question. And you're right. I have access to a broad spectrum of information. Like I was saying, I think the biggest opportunity is seeing disruption from the pandemic, and seeing where things are going to change. Because I think that the change from the pandemic is going to stick for a long time. In most cases, it's really an acceleration of change that was happening already. So, for example, this kind of video conversation, we've been on a slow path to being able to do things on video for, well over a decade. This year, we're all becoming comfortable with it. So many businesses that used to have to be a physical business are now going to be a virtual business. I think education is going to be highly disrupted because of this kind of change. I think healthcare is going to be highly disrupted because of this kind of change.
Thank you. One thing we just got a question, but it reminded me from what we haven't emphasized enough is 100 Coaches is global. We have all over. And so we have a query here from an individual and from Singapore. And she says, how can we work together? And so our folks are out there. We have members around the world, but even with virtual, it doesn't really matter. So what's the comment to you that you have on our global aspect?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage you to go to our website, which is 100coaches.com. And you can see the folks that we have sort of in our community. I know there's at least a couple people, I think, in Singapore who are there, and you can either reach out to them or reach out to me through the website, and I'd be happy to make connections for you.
That's great. And that you are the nexus of the connectors. And I think the virtue of that, Scott, is the perspective that you bring, but and in a way you help the rest of us see, because when you're running your own business, solo entrepreneur, or a small practice, whatever, unless you're working with a global firm, it's pretty easy to get narrow, or at least speaking for myself. So it's so rewarding to be part of a larger community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the world is small, and in some ways we're smaller. I'm always having to check myself, recognizing that the inputs that I have, the information that I'm getting, is really from a very, very narrow place. But I'll tell you, recently we launched an initiative with Thinkers 50 called Leading Global Coaches. And one of the intentions of Leading Global Coaches was to identify coaches around the world, not just Western coaches. And I was fortunate enough to get the responsibility of identifying coaches in Africa. And I met the great coach, Nen Conde, and she and I spoke many times. And I remember at one point in the conversation, I said to her, one of our objectives is to bring sort of the knowledge that we have. I mean, this is Marshall Goldsmith, #1 coach in the world, to bring more of that to Africa. And she very quickly and quite frankly, delightfully, reminded me that we have as much to learn from what goes on as Africa as we do to teach. And it's important to maintain that mindset at all times, is that we are not smarter, we're not faster, we're not whatever. We are learners, right? And the more opportunities we give ourselves to learn more information from a more diverse group of people, the better we're all going to be.
That's such a powerful thought. And I always try to share that when I hear from people who reach out to me from cultures different from my own. and they want to know about essentially U.S. management practices or whatever, or leadership. And I always try, if the conversation goes long enough, to mine the strengths of your own culture, and make it work best for you, and what we can learn from you as well. And that's a sub benefit or a corollary benefit, I think, of 100 coaches.
Right. John, your great podcast here is called Grace. And I would say that, so we're touching on this idea of, what is grace? And for me, I think grace has always been recognizing the infiniteness of your own graces, of your own greatness, within the context of your humility. Is, individually, everybody has so much to offer and is so great, and simultaneously is just a very small piece of a greater whole. And to hold those two things in balance, like knowing that you're amazing, but also that you're just a small part of something bigger, for me has always been sort of the notion of grace.
That's a great way of looking at it. And I'm glad you emphasized the quote, the greatness of self, because not to be, not in an egotistical way, but in the sense of, I have something to offer others. And I think we sometimes forget that. So, Scott, you've been a delightful guest. How can people find you one more time?
The best way to find me is 100coaches.com. That's 100coaches.com. And you'll see about the organization. You'll see me. There's all sorts of ways to reach me through the website. That's my home now.
That's great. Scott, thank you. And with that, I say thank you. And we are checking out.
Awesome. Thanks, John.